Your knowledge of contract language is imperative.
You must know what a violation looks like if you wish to be active in its cessation.
It is important to understand that being active and knowledgeable affects your overall bargaining strength.
Together, we can forge a more militant NALC.
Good morning, and welcome back to Parcels of Knowledge, that podcast dedicated to delivering them parcels of knowledge to this city letter carrier with your host, the Roseville Wrecking Ball. Today, we have a special treat. We are going to talk about the status of stewards and what is and isn't allowed. But first, I just would like to say that, there's 3 episodes this week, but I might be dropping some episodes just because I'm not going to be present potentially during Christmas season because of how busy it is. So, maybe you guys will have something to listen to if you're going to be out there delivering during the Christmas season. So I'm just trying to give you guys a decent amount of education for you to work with while you're out there delivering 12 hours a day in the dark. Hopefully you get them tips out there. Now, I recently got a call from a good friend, and turns out one of his stewards was treated pretty poorly. You know, they basically had him in a room, and they were being very awful. And he said something, and they went off on him, and I just want to talk to the stewards who don't know any better. This individual, they did, and they got it under control, but some of you stewards might be new, so I am going to crack open the Stewards' Right Guide, the legal rights of union stewards, and we are going to talk about the special status of union stewards. Standing up to the bosses is essential to being a steward. On the shop floor, in supervisors' offices, and in grievance meetings, you must defend the action of members and, when appropriate, contest those of management. In many cases, you should be able to make your points temperately, practicing quiet diplomacy. But occasions will undoubtedly arise when you will want to raise your voice and challenge a supervisor's credibility or argue your case in other vigorous ways. A widely accepted labor relations canon allows employers to discipline workers who fail to act respectfully toward management. Some legal treaties call this the master-servant rule. If stewards and other representatives were subject to this rule while engaging in union activity, they would face an intolerable risk. Speaking up for a member could put their own job in jeopardy. To resolve this dilemma, labor law accords a special status to stewards, officers, and other union representatives. Under the National Labor Relations Act, when union stewards and officers engage in representational activity, including grievance meetings and bargaining sessions, behavior that, in other circumstances, would warrant discipline must be tolerated. According to one NLRB ruling, the relationship at a grievance meeting is not a master-servant relationship, but a relationship between company advocates on one side and union advocates on the other side, engaged as equal opposing parties in litigation. In another decision, the board said some profanity and even defiance must be tolerated during confrontations over contractual rights. The principle of union equality, sometimes termed steward's immunity, is also recognized by the courts. As stated by the Fifth Circuit, the National Labor Relations Act has ordinarily been interpreted to protect the employee against discipline for impulsive and perhaps insubordinate behavior that occurs during grievance meetings. For such meetings require a free and frank exchange of views and often arise from highly emotional and personal conflicts. The equity principle is consistent with U.S. Supreme Court pronouncements that federal labor policy protects robust debate and gives a union license to use intemperament abusive or insulting language without fear of restraint or penalty if it believes such rhetoric to be effective means to make its points. Labor arbitrators generally agree. Typical is this ruling by arbitrator Fred Whitney. As distasteful as the words he used may be, the fact remains that the steward was not in the status of an employee when he called the division manager a fool and liar. At that time, the employer and employee relationship did not exist. Rather, the relationship was between a company and union representative. The matter under consideration being a grievance filed by employees whom the grievant represented in his official capacity as union steward. They stood as equals when negotiating the grievance. The equality principle allows a representative to speak in a loud voice, gesture, use salty language, demean a supervisor's credibility, or threaten group protests. Aggressive advocacy may not be advisable, but it is not insubordination. When does the equality principle apply? Being a steward is not a general license to tell management to stick it. The equality principle applies when a steward acts in a representational capacity. It does not apply when a steward acts in his or her individual capacity. Over here at the post office, we call that being on 613 time and being off the workroom floor. But in front of other carriers, it's not necessarily okay, and it's definitely not okay if you're not on 613 time. A steward acts in her representational capacity when she argues the contract matter, attempts to resolve a problem, investigates a complaint, requests information, presents a grievance, disputes a decision affecting the bargaining unit, or leads a union protest. A steward acts in her individual capacity when she objects to a work assignment, responds to criticism of her job performance, or receives notice of her own discipline. NLRA, protection has its limits. Management may impose discipline for egregious misconduct that renders the representative unfit for further service. Cases in point include extreme profanity, racial slurs, physical threats, and blocking or touching a supervisor. Stewards can also be disciplined for dishonesty, soliciting fake testimony, taking part in illegal walkouts, or distributing business meetings or disrupting business meetings or work activities. To deter a supervisor from exaggerating or mischaracterizing your conduct, ask one or more coworkers to join you during the grievance meeting and other discussions with management. Typically, we don't have that here at the NALC other than with discussions. You can't have other employees join the grievance meeting unless they're being brought in as a witness, which has particular circumstances. Management may not warn or otherwise punish a steward for filing grievance, even if a case lacks merit or is petty or offensive. Nor may a steward be threatened for encouraging employees to file. The law also forbids managers from other retaliatory conduct such as poor evaluations, burdensome work schedules, transfers to other departments. And we got to talk about veiled threats. Veiled threats can be just as coercive as direct threats. It is unlawful to tell a steward, if you don't like it around here, why don't you get another job? Because it suggests that employment and union activity are not compatible. Many bosses believe that a steward can be held to a higher standards than the rank and file. A supervisor might say, of all the people, you are supposed to know the rules, as he writes you up for a minor infraction. This mindset is unlawful. And yeah, this happens all the time as a steward here at Roseville, especially a new steward. That was commonly what they would say, because I guess that's what they would believe prior to me being here. But I set that straight. An employer violates the NLRA if it enforces a rule against a steward that is not enforced against other employees. Nor may it be a harsher punishment imposed for the same offense. Even telling a steward that he or she is expected to set an example is an unfair labor practice. Exception. An exception may apply when a walkout violates a contractual no-strike clause. An employer can impose a more severe penalty on an officer or steward if the representative instigates the illegal stoppage, or if the contract requires representatives to take affirmative steps, such as instructing employees to return to work. We do have those instructions in our contract. Unfair labor practice charges. If management threatens, discriminates against, or disciplines a steward for taking part in grievance activity, the union should file an unfair labor practice charge as well as a grievance. The union may be able to persuade the labor board not to defer the charge by taking one or more of the following steps. Include a Section 8A4 claim asserting the employer's actions were based at least in part on the steward's use or threatened use of NLRB procedures. Include a Section 8A5 claim that the employer failed to timely furnish information requested by the union to investigate the matter. Refuse to stipulate that an arbitrator can rule on the unfair labor practice. Now, we're going to move on to a question and answer segment so that you guys can properly understand what I just talked about. So, question. While arguing a grievance, I shook my finger at a manager. He said, "I don't care if you're a steward. If you do that again, I will have your job." Did I go over the line as the steward? No. Finger shaking is not egregious. File an unfair labor practice charge against the illegal threat. Question. I was warned for yelling at a grievance meeting. Don't I have a right to raise my voice? Answer. Yes. The Labor Act protects vigorous conduct at grievance meetings and including shouting. Question. At a second step grievance meeting, I called my supervisor a barefaced liar. As it turned out, I was wrong. Can I be punished? Answer. No. A steward who honestly believes that a supervisor is lying has a right to say so, even if the accusation turns out to be incorrect. Question. In the middle of a grievance discussion, the personnel manager declared, "This meeting is over. Go back to work." I continued to argue for a minute or so. Am I subject to discipline? Answer. This depends. The board says an employer must tolerate a short cooling off period at the end of a grievance discussion, as it is unrealistic to believe that the principals involved in a heated exchange can check their emotions at the drop of a hat. Punishment is allowed. However, if you refused repeated orders to return to work, punishment is allowed. Question. When a steward tried to stop her boss from performing bargaining unit work, several workers ceased their duties to listen. Losing her temper, the steward said the supervisor should have his mouth bashed in, and she was going to do it. Then she dared him to fire her, which he did. The next day, the steward called to apologize, but the company refused to take her back. Do we have a case under the NLRA? Probably not. The steward threatened violence and disrupted work, the essence of egregious misconduct. Question. A supervisor made several ridiculous claims during a grievance meeting. Infuriated, I called him a jackass. Did I go too far? Answer. No. Mild swearing during a grievance discussion, short of extreme profanity, is protected. In one case, the board reinstated a steward who was fired for calling his boss a stupid ass. In another, it removed the reprimand of a representative who told his supervisor, "I don't give a fuck who you call." In a third, it reinstated an employee who referred to a company officer as a stupid fucking moron. Question: can a supervisor tell a steward to shut up and listen during a grievance meeting? Answer: yes. If this is the worst of it, a vigorous give and take is allowed both parties during grievance discussions. Question: at a first step grievance meeting, I accused the supervisor of altering an employee's time record. She said she would sue me for slander. Should I be concerned? Answer: no. Statements during grievance and arbitration sessions are legally privileged against defamation lawsuits. File an unfair labor charge over the illegal threat. Question: my supervisor called one of my grievances infantile. Should I file an unfair labor charge? Answer: no. Bosses are allowed to criticize union activity as long as the comments do not include threats, coercion, harassment, or other forms of intimidation. Question: since my election as steward, supervision has been all over me, sometimes staring at me for hours. Is this legal? Answer: no. Monitoring a steward more closely than others violates the Labor Act. But just keep in mind that it gets more complicated as a carrier, because a lot of times management will do things like give you a $39.99 over and over. If you are showing deficiencies, they are allowed to single you out in that fashion if you cannot prove that they're doing it because you're a steward. Question: an employee in my department told her boss that a coworker was sleeping on the job. When I told her that the union has a bylaw against informing, she complained to human relations that I harassed her. Company policy defines harassment as any statements considered offensive by another employee. Can the company take action against me? Answer: no. Stewards may insist that members obey union rules. Encouraging solidarity is protected by the NLRA even if a worker is upset or offended. Question: a supervisor saw me and two others drinking beer during lunch. The co-worker received written warning, but I was given a 3-day suspension because you're the union steward. You should know better. Is this okay? Or should I file an unfair labor charge? Answer: you should file an unfair labor charge. Management may not increase the punishment because a worker is a union representative. Question: if a member is assigned duties outside of the job description, can I tell her not to do the work? Answer: not without risk to you and the employee. One of the most venerable maxims in labor relations, applicable to both rank and file and stewards, is obey now and grieve later. Tell the member to do the work, then file a grievance. The obey now and grieve later rule does not apply to an unusually dangerous assignment that is outside the normal duties of the employee. Also, accepted is in order to carry out an illegal or unethical act. Question: can I get in trouble for advising a worker not to sign a warning slip? Answer: yes, if a company policy requires employees to sign. The safest course is to direct the worker to write signed under protest. Over here, we don't sign any forms other than PS forms, just to let you know. Question: personnel wants to get me because I am too confrontational when arguing grievances. If they check my job application and find a false entry about my educational level, could they fire me? Answer: not legally. Investigating a steward's background because of protected activity violates the NLRA. Question: I applied for a promotion. The plant manager said that the post requires full-time attention. Since I spend 10 hours a week on union business, I cannot qualify. Is this legal? Answer: hard to say. Years ago, the NLRB ruled against the steward on the grounds that the Labor Act does not guarantee a right to engage in union activity during work time. A later decision, however, said this case should be given a narrow application. This does not apply to our situation because steward time is guaranteed through our contract. Question: can a union contract provision give stewards superseniority? Answer: yes, depending on its scope. A union contract can grant superseniority in the event of layoffs or recalls to work. Preferences for other purposes, however, such as vacation or days off, may not violate the NLRA. So, this is actually given to us in our contract as well. This is superseniority for layoffs, and that includes even sending a CCA out who is a steward involuntarily to another office. Question: when I urged 2 witnesses to sign statements supporting a grievance, one of them complained to management. Now I have been charged with bullying. Is this an unfair labor practice? Answer: yes. The special protections afforded union representatives apply to a broad range of grievance-related activity, including persuading witnesses to testify. The fact that an employee is annoyed or upset does not make a steward's conduct unprotected. Question: the union grievance form requires a grievance signature. A worker was absent on the last filing day, so I signed for him. If management checks the handwriting and fires me for dishonesty, could I file an unfair labor practice charge? Answer: yes. Grievance activity is protected in the absence of egregious misconduct. Signing an employee's name in order to preserve a grievance and not for the representative's own gain or benefit does not rise to the level of egregious misconduct. Question: if a supervisor rescinds a threat to a steward, can you still file an unfair labor charge? Answer: yes. In order to cure an NLRA violation, an employer must timely admit its wrongdoing, repudiate its illegal conduct, publicize the repudiation to the employees involved, and provide assurances that it will not again interfere with protected union rights. All right, so that ends the reading from the book. I do want to mention that when management is being particularly disrespectful to a steward, just know that management is supposed to set the example in the office. And if a steward reacts to management's disrespect, to be honest, mutual respect is supposed to be encompassing all individuals, not just carriers, but also management. That's the whole point of saying that it's mutual. One argument we fail to raise sometimes is management's complicity in creating an environment where such behavior could be condoned or acceptable. For example, if a manager is consistently disrespecting their workers or steward and raising their voice and saying profanity, and suddenly wants to issue discipline to a steward for doing so during a grievance meeting, well, that's a complete problem, and it's in violation of many things. But one argument we fail to raise sometimes is that a behavior that has been tolerated becomes an acceptable behavior. It does not meet the just cause principles because it's tough to understand or overcome the principle that do you know the rule if the rule is consistently being violated. So that is one argument we got to make sure we keep locked up in case we ever need it, because I know there are people out there who are dealing with this. I can actually name a few off the top of my head, and not even including the guy who called yesterday. But either way, don't forget that Region 2 NBA candidate Debbie Dixon, by the way, Region 2 is, hopefully I get all this right, Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Utah, and Washington. Once again, Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Utah, and Washington. I do understand most of those states have very little city letter carriers, but I also understand that that spans a large swath of land in the United States. So many of my listeners may come from that portion. If you come from one of those states, you have a vested interest in this candidate. You have the chance right now to ask her any question you want about your region, about who she is, anything. Honestly, you can even ask her what her favorite food is. You can pull up old grudges and ask her controversial questions. Put her on the spot. Either way, we've always had that on my podcast. This is just one other interview. I'm trying to allow for a healthy election, which means that you should know all candidates. The current incumbent, which I don't know if he's going to run again, but he's known. You know, everyone knows him because he's been around since 2022. So, if you haven't already submitted questions for Debbie Dixon, feel free to submit them to me. My email is rosevillewreckingball@yahoo.com. You can also text those questions to 586-209-1902. Like any of my other interviews, you will be anonymous, whether you want to or not. I'm going to ask every single question. The only way I wouldn't answer your question is if I somehow forgot it. But I don't have a history of that. I've forgotten very few questions. So as long as you send them to me in a reasonable amount of time, I will ask Debbie Dixon every question. And you can submit a question up until Christmas Day. After that, me and Debbie Dixon will go and record the episode, and it will be posted early January. Hopefully, you learned something valuable today. And, as always, have a good day.
Out to the Roseville Wrecking Ball. He is an Article 8 scholar, and thank God. We need Article 8 scholars right now. The Grievous Genius and the Roseville Wrecking Ball doing amazing work.
Brothers and sisters, this guy is good, man. He's fucking good.
And my boy Joshua, he killed it. Man, he's lockstep right now. He's killing it.
You would think this guy has been around for 30 fucking